Joining me now is the always brilliant Douglas Murray, best-selling author and associate editor of The Spectator. And Douglas, your new book, The War on the West, is already topping bestseller lists and getting some rave reviews. It's not out for another month in Australia. And what this book tackles is something that is just a crucial issue right now, the war on the West. It's evident in the education system, which is being used to indoctrinate young people against Western civilization and values. And while that's happening, whilst the left indulge in what you call an orgy of self-abuse, we've got the Chinese Communist Party patiently and systematically pursuing their global ambitions.
That's right. It's great to be with you as ever, Rita. Yes, essentially what I address in The War on the West is this extraordinary self-destruction which is going on in all of our countries. It's being led by America, but it's the same story in Australia, New Zealand, in Britain, in Canada. Basically, a desire to sort of rid ourselves of our history, to atone for our histories as if we were the only people ever to do anything bad in the past and the rest of the world was a sort of Eden until we had any involvement with it. It's an attempt to rid ourselves of our cultural heritage by putting everything through the remorseless spin cycle of identity and racial politics. It's an attack on our religious foundations, an attack on our philosophical foundations. And, you know, there are lots of different forms of anti-Westernism. There's Arab anti-Westernism, there's Chinese anti-Westernism. But the really interesting one that I focus on in this book is Western anti-Westernism. The thing we're doing to ourselves, the way we're weakening ourselves, not just in a way that harms ourselves, but in a way that makes us look weak to rivals, competitors, and even enemies around the world. And as you say, Rita, you know, whilst we're doing all of this, you know, what is Russia doing? What is the Chinese Communist Party doing? There's a complete lack, not just of historical context about the West, but the world as it is today.
In your book, you also talk about just how virulently racist and anti-Semitic Karl Marx was, but somehow he escapes this censure, this attack and scrutiny, while we've got our Western heroes, from Churchill to Abraham Lincoln, held to a completely different standard and their statues torn down.
That's right. As I show in The War on the West, absolutely every hero of the West has now been torn down in exactly the same way. People that we were brought up once to revere, and rightly revere in most cases, are all put through this spin cycle which says, you know, they're guilty of having views that were racist by the standards of 2022. Like, amazing, isn't it, to think that people born in, say, the 17th century didn't have exactly the same views as you and I have today. Extraordinary. But yes, this attempt that's going on, it reveals itself by who it doesn't do this to, who it doesn't single out for this same assault as everyone else. And as I show in the book, with some remorseless but very enjoyable detail, I hope, Karl Marx is the most obvious example. Every single thinker of the European Enlightenments has been torn down in recent years, accused of racism or involvement in colonialism or saying the wrong thing about slavery, etc., except, mystifyingly, Rita, for Karl Marx. And Karl Marx, I went through all of the private and public writings of his. You know, in his letters, he's profoundly racist. He repeatedly uses the N-word, often hyphenated to the word Jew, because he's very anti-Semitic as well. He's bad on slavery, bad on colonialism, and I have yet to see any leftist or anti-Western protester try to pull down the statues of Karl Marx. Far from it. Just last year, the Chinese Communist Party paid for another statue of Karl Marx to go up in Germany. And you see, I think this shows something very revealing about what we're really dealing with when we talk about the anti-Westernists in the West. We're really dealing with a form of cultural revolutionary. And one of those forms of cultural revolutionary are people who simply want to smuggle in to our societies now the same terrible ideology they tried before. And by the way, just quickly, Rita, if I may, since the serials of this book have come out and this point about Marx has come out, a number of Marxists and others have come out of the woodwork to defend their great hero. And what's their line of defense? They've said, Douglas, you don't understand. He was a man of his time. Oh, you mean like how interesting. Like Winston Churchill, you mean? Like Abraham Lincoln, like Thomas Jefferson, you mean? Like everybody else, like Voltaire, like John Stuart Mill, you mean? But of course, then there's a second one. They say, oh, but we don't look to him for his horrible personal views. We look to him for his economic theories. And again, oh, how convenient. Because we don't look to Churchill for his views in the 1890s about people in Sudan. We look up to him because of saving the world from fascism in 1939 to 1940. So it's a very revealing game, this one, that the Marxists play, and I'm so glad to help expose it.